Jensen Huang and Lisa Su have in common? Aside from leading the most valuable chip companies in the world, two of them are actually related to each other, and all three of them are Taiwanese American. Taiwan and America dominate the chip industry as well as its technology, because in the past few years, as well as the past decades, the United States and China have been racing against each other to dominate the other in terms of chip technology. So far, the United States has been winning. It has the most advanced firms with the most advanced chips. Recently, 3nm chips were unveiled, which are the smallest transistors as well as the most efficient. China doesn't have that technology. But China wants to catch up, because chips are not good only for their economy. Indeed, chips are actually valuable for the military as well. New military technology, like guided missiles or fighter airplanes, rely on the most advanced absolute chip technology that there is in a country to offer. So with that in mind, we consider today's question: what must China do to reduce its reliance on foreign chip technology? And we come to the answer that China must perform the daunting task of recreating a global supply chain in its own backyard. First, China must invest heavily in EUV technology. Second, China must make strides in chip design. And lastly, China must make good advances and investment in AI chips. What costs $200 million as the world's most advanced machine? It's not something used to make aircraft. Rather, it's a machine made by ASML, a small Dutch company that sits in the European Union, that is used to shoot light at small silicon wafers in order to imprint in them the nanometer scale designs needed for the iPhones that we all have today. Leading us to the first thing that China must do to reduce its reliance on foreign chip technology, and that is investing in EUV. EUV, also known as extreme ultraviolet lithography, is a process where light is condensed into ultraviolet light, the most extreme and small wavelength ultraviolet light produced possible. The reason we need this ultraviolet light instead of regular light is because the wavelength is smaller. The smaller the wavelength, the smaller you can make the transistors, which means that the more efficient that your chips are. However, China is unable to make this technology. So, essentially, the entire world relies on ASML, that Dutch company, to make it. However, China is going to be having some trouble here, because as The Guardian tells us on January 2nd of this year, Biden has blocked ASML from being able to sell to China. Obviously, ASML is pretty sad about this because China would buy a ton of their stuff, but Biden does not want China to be advancing this way, further driving home the idea that China absolutely must invest in extreme ultraviolet lithography in order to reduce its reliance on companies like ASML, which it's not even allowed to buy from anymore. Now, how do we know how all this works? Well, Zeiss told us, and they're not just some random used company. Indeed, Zeiss is one of the component manufacturers for ASML, further driving home the fact that producing EUV technology is going to be extremely difficult, because ASML is not just a standalone company. They rely on a huge network of manufacturers like Zeiss in order to produce the components which they then assemble into their machine. The average 747 might have 6 million parts, but in just one person's iPhone on that machine, in that airplane, they will have more parts in their CPU than every single component in every single aircraft in the entire world. So the second reason, the second thing that China must do in order to reduce its reliance on foreign chip technology is to improve their chip design. Chip design is crucial because of the sheer complexity of them. 13 billion transistors in just one chip, that is unimaginable complexity, considering that airplanes might have 6 million. Each chip is so complicated that the design is pretty tough as well. As Chip Wars, a book explaining the chip war between China and America, explains to us on October 4th of 2022. Essentially, what China must do is to create entire new companies that can rival the 3 largest American firms in designing chips. Now, what's the situation here? Essentially, they're going to need to develop completely new ways, completely new software of designing all the 13 billion little transistors and putting them together in a way that is logical and that works for the CPU. This is going to be incredibly difficult, but China already recognizes that this is critical for their success because, as Reuters tells us on December 29th of last year, China is already investing in these firms that design software, that design chips. But lastly, consider one of the most important aspects, and that is AI. AI is the reason that extempers fear our jobs will be replaced. And that AI runs completely on chips. So thirdly, we look at AI chips. What about AI chips makes them so special? Essentially, they run different from the CPUs that you see in our phones. AI chips are able to run multiple calculations at once. While a phone chip might be able to run 4 or 16 calculations simultaneously, an AI chip like NVIDIA's GPUs can do 1,000. Now, that is naturally going to be a very, very complicated technology, as Bloomberg tells us on December 3rd of last year. Now, what this means for China is that in order to make strides in their AI industry, they need a ton of chips, because AI requires massive, massive amounts of computing power in order to get it into the somewhat workable state that ChatGPT is currently in. So, as Reuters explains in a different article on December 13th of last year, China's mega AI growth, like 01 AI, which recently reached a $1 billion valuation, they're going to need a lot of those AI chips. However, as we saw earlier, all of the best AI chip companies like NVIDIA, TSMC, and AMD are all run by Taiwanese Americans, and none of them are able to sell to China. It's not because they don't want to. They would love to make that money, just like ASML would. But once again, as Reuters tells us, actually the New York Times tells us, Biden has not let them. So in the end, when we return to today's question, we come to the conclusion that China will face an enormously difficult task in recreating a global chip supply industry in its own backyard. But if it's able to do it, it might be able to unleash explosive growth. Thank you.